Since antiquity, humans have tried to design the perfect society from scratch. We pour the concrete, expect a utopia, but inevitably, the foundation cracks. The problem begins with a failure of definition. In a philosophical sense, the world we inhabit is the Lebenswelt, the shared horizon of meaning and culture that we live within, which is entirely distinct from the physical laws governing the universe. This is philosopher Hannah Arendt. She argued that the human world is an artefact, a durable space of institutions, laws, and culture that we construct to separate ourselves from pure nature. But deciding what makes that constructed space better is a trap. This is philosopher Isaiah Berlin. He pointed out that our ultimate human values do not neatly align. Values like freedom and equality are often in tension. Maximizing absolute individual freedom allows for massive disparities in power, while enforcing absolute equality requires an authority strong enough to severely restrict individual choice. We also face modern contradictions. For decades, economic growth was the standard for progress, yet the mechanics of that growth are now dismantling the very ecological conditions required for human life to remain viable on this planet. A better world is not a universally agreed-upon utopia waiting to be assembled. It is an ongoing, messy negotiation between values that frequently pull us in opposite directions. This tension turns into conflict when we mistake the development of a community for the assembly of a physical object. This animation shows fabrication, executing a rigid plan, treating elements as raw materials molded into a static form. Arendt contrasted this with action. When diverse humans freely collide, the results are unpredictable. You cannot plot spontaneity on a schematic. History shows that when political systems try to force the unpredictable web of human action into a rigid blueprint, the structure eventually collapses under the weight of its own inflexibility. To understand our modern obsession with blueprints, we have to look at how our concept of time evolved. Ancient societies saw history as a repeating cycle, but during the Enlightenment, thinkers like Immanuel Kant reimagined history as a straight line pointing toward infinite rational progress. This is George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He formalized this linear view into what he called the odyssey of the spirit, suggesting that human history was a rational process marching toward an absolute, predetermined destination. Karl Marx adapted this narrative. He stripped away the spiritual elements and argued that history was driven entirely by a materialist framework, a succession of economic systems that would inevitably evolve into a final form. Marx provided a map for this evolution. He theorized that history would reach its end through a class struggle that would permanently resolve human inequality. These grand narratives convinced leaders that society was a puzzle with a single permanent solution. This belief allowed them to justify almost any action as a necessary step toward that final, perfect arrangement. When politics is reduced to an act of fabrication, individual citizens are treated as raw material. They are cut, hammered, and discarded based on how well they fit the master plan. Economist Friedrich Hayek identified this as a fatal conceit. He argued that complex societies possess too much distributed knowledge for any central planner to ever understand, let alone manage without descending into tyranny. Edmund Burke offered a similar warning, arguing against the violent desire to wipe the societal slate clean. He believed that change should be organic and respectful of the traditions that provide a society its stability. In the wake of modern catastrophes, philosopher Jean-François Lyotard noted that these totalizing narratives have lost their credibility. The idea that history is a predictable march toward a single goal has been dismantled by reality. If we want to improve the world, we have to start by abandoning the fantasy that it can be engineered from the top down. Without a master plan, how does change actually happen? It happens because history is open, driven by several different spheres of influence acting simultaneously. Transformation occurs across 4 dimensions. In the material realm, we develop the technical systems and infrastructure that sustain life, though we must ensure these systems don't become alienating or self-defeating. This moves in parallel with institutional and cultural changes. We require deliberative democratic systems to handle complex long-term problems, and we need to shift our social imaginaries. the underlying ideas and values that a culture takes for granted. Finally, the subjective experience matters. Individuals must undergo what Paulo Freire called consciousization, becoming aware of their own power to act. Arendt reminds us that this concerted human action is the only way to build something durable. None of these forces work in isolation. Lasting change is a continuous synchronization where these different dimensions of society move together. Today, our actions are guided by a new kind of responsibility. Philosopher Hans Jonas suggested we act with a heuristic of fear, an awareness of ecological limits that extends our ethical obligations to future generations. We are also seeing a shift toward Amartya Sen's model of justice, which focuses on capabilities, the practical freedoms and opportunities people actually have to lead lives they find meaningful. This is Václav Havel. He called for lucid hope, the conviction that an action is worth doing because it has meaning, regardless of how likely it is to succeed in the short term. Redefining utopia in this way changes our perspective. As Eduardo Galeano suggested, utopia is not a destination we will eventually reach. It is a horizon that moves as we move. We cannot build a perfect world the way we build a table, but through plural, responsible action, the horizon of utopia serves its true purpose.